Welcome to The Corner, La Source's digital show dedicated to the sport and entertainment industry. Every 2 weeks, we invite a professional to share their experience, background, and challenges. The sport industry moves fast, and having their insights is the best way to keep up to speed. Welcome to The Corner.
Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Le Corner International. My name is Leandro Momoyeux, partner at La Source, and I'm honored to be joined by Chris Gerstle from European Leagues. Glad to have you here in our Le Corner podcast, Chris. Hope you are doing well. It will probably not come as a surprise to those listeners that know my background a little bit, but we know each other quite well, and I know you as a very knowledgeable person in the sports industry, maybe sometimes working a bit in the shadows, but definitely with big impact and a strong strategic vision. So not putting a lot of pressure, but great to have you here. And maybe to kick off, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and give us a bit of an insight into your professional journey?
Thanks, Leander, and thanks for inviting me. Yes, as you hinted at, we've obviously known each other for a little while. We used to work together when you're at the Belgian league. I've been at the European leagues for now. I sometimes don't believe it, but 8 coming on 9 years, or 9th year already. But yes, my journey here, I kind of summarize it as a career change journey. I went to university, studied, business and languages. I actually studied Japanese. I have a Japanese background as well. And that led me to work in the sports, in the financial world. Investment management took me to Tokyo and London, working with a company called BlackRock. And then at some stage along that journey, I think many other people now, as the sports industry has grown and the number of opportunities have increased, I looked to do a career change. So I quit, did a sports management program, and then looked for opportunities specifically in football. I did want to work in football as opposed to sports in general or another sport, and managed to land myself here. At the time, it was called the EPFL, the European Professional Football Leagues. It's actually rebranded since I've been here, and now it's called the European Leagues.
Great. So you started your professional career in a different industry. How was that transition for you initially? Especially in correlation to your current position as Director of Strategy and Development at European Leagues?
So I have to say, I'm not. It's hard to probably analyze to a direct link at all. I mean, BlackRock was quite a big company, although it began as a small company. When I was working in Tokyo, it was also a 10, 12 person office in Tokyo. Some of these companies now, obviously hundreds of people in them. So that made me get used to working in a small office environment. I think the football industry, especially the league level industry, it's not as big as people think. I mean, sometimes there are 4 people working in a league office, whether you're one of the smaller countries. Obviously, there's many more in the larger leagues. I think it gave me a solid general understanding in communication, doing presentations, doing client presentations, and those sort of things. And obviously, at the European leagues, as I'll explain later on, my role is more on the business side of trying to work with our members, as opposed to the political side of our association. So I guess I tried to take, I wouldn't call it directly transferable because that was investment management world, equities and bonds and interest rates and all that sort of stuff, which is not directly relevant. Although at a macro level, obviously that impacts the entire economy in general.
Yeah, I think it's a very good background to have. For sure, in these kind of in the evolving landscape in sports, I guess it's valuable and it's experience you can still use in your day-to-day job. You've mentioned that you made a career switch. You wanted to move towards sports. I know you have a coaching license. I know you're probably passionate about football as well. And you've mentioned doing a sports management course. How did you end up then specifically with the European leagues? And how did you land the job? How did they manage to convince you to be part of the European Leagues team?
So yes, you kind of touched on something I did while I was studying, because obviously I had a bit of, let's call it, free time once as a student. Something I did youth coaching courses in the FA. So I had no interest in coaching at an adult level at all. Something I actually hope I'll do again one day. My son is 6 now, so he's getting to the age now where he can start to coach a little bit. But no, I've always enjoyed playing. I played at various levels in my life, both futsal and outdoor football. I played at a couple academies in the UK, etc. At some stage, you realize that you're clearly not going to be good enough or big enough. In my case, you know how tall I am, Leander. No, so I think that was the link with football. Has been there throughout my entire life. One thing I didn't mention, but I was actually born in Tokyo. We moved to the US and then to Australia and then to London. And in between that, I also lived in Japan. And the one constant in my whole entire life, which actually helped me to also make friends, was football. Everywhere I went, Japan, UK, Australia, wherever it was, I always played football, sometimes to a higher level than others, but it's something that I've had through in my entire life. It's been, as they say, football is a common language everywhere you go. And if you can play a decent amount of football, you can get invited to join the teams, and then you kind of make your way through school life. So that was always very, very helpful. And the highlight, at least in London, we got to play a final of a schools competition at the old Highbury. So we got to play on the pitch there. We won too, which was nice. We were the underdogs. So that was a nice kind of footballing memory from the old Arsenal world. So while I was finishing my studying, I was looking around at opportunities. I think those who want to work in the football world also understand it's quite a small world, actually. There aren't, there's only one FIFA, one UEFA, one league body at a national level. So I looked around at, frankly, what was available at the time and tried to weigh up different opportunities. I was looking for an international type role. As I explained before, I'm not kind of from one country, one person, lived in one place my whole life. Therefore, the international nature was something that I was ideally looking for as opposed to a domestic role. I stumbled across the EPFL at the time. They had a job called researcher. And I basically took the opportunity that I could find at the time that I thought suited my skills and my interests. And also, the European Leagues is based in Nyon in Switzerland. And I think moving to Switzerland to be involved in the sports world clearly makes a lot of sense given the general sports environment here, whether you're talking about FIFA, the IOC, or the hundreds of sports federations. And from a football perspective, as you know, Leander, here in Little Nyon, we have the European Club Association. We have UEFA here as well. So it's a small little town on the outskirts of Geneva. If you didn't work in football, you'd just go straight by it on the train. But actually, from a European football perspective, it's actually a bit of a focal point actually.
Yeah, cool. It's definitely a nice environment to be in Switzerland. I think with everything that is around you, I think it's just in terms of the nature, it's a beautiful environment. But as you say, professionally, it's also great to build your network, and you probably have a lot of you're maybe playing soccer now or football every week with people from UEFA and FIFA and whatever. So maybe you can still build on your skills as you mentioned, and you said you weren't playing at a high level, but winning at least a trophy in the schools competitions is something I can relate to, because that's the highest achievement I have in football as well. So it's great to hear. But so that makes a transition to what you're currently doing, and the next kind of segment of this podcast is about the organization itself, European Leagues. Can you tell us a little bit more about what European Leagues does, and what is their kind of purpose, and how has that maybe evolved along the way as well?
Sure. So the European Leagues was actually formerly called the EPFL, but now the European Leagues. it's a member-based association. Historically, our membership has changed slightly, but historically it was the so-called independent leagues. So obviously, as many of you and the listeners will be aware, football competitions have, to a large extent, especially in Europe, the top division or top tier, second tier, have broken away, at least from a legal perspective, from the federation, because they want basically more autonomy over managing their own competitions. So with that independence grew a separate group of stakeholders, if you call them that. They're not part of the FA directly. There's always a link with the FA in every country, but they have their own organizing body. And as those grew, they have, in fact, most of them have common challenges as opposed to them competing with each other. I mean, their respective clubs will compete in Europe, let's say, on the international stage. But one domestic league and another domestic league don't really compete directly because they're really only competing in their own domestic market, especially from a business perspective. Unless you're the very biggest leagues where you might be competing in Asia for TV rights. But the vast majority of our members are actually medium and small leagues, as we call them, outside the top five. And so they're independent organizations. And the association was created initially for two reasons, I would say. We kind of call it for political reasons and then for non-political reasons. The political reasons would be coming together and lobbying for or against whatever topics that could impact domestic football, whether that be at a FIFA level or a UEFA level or a European level. But along that, there's the whole knowledge sharing element where these leagues face common challenges in managing their own competitions, whether it's licensing, financial, stadium security, commercial, business. And so therefore this network, which is kind of, a one-of-a-kind network for these leagues to get together, allows them to share and become friends and help each other as much as they can. So that was the genesis of the organization. And then my specific role, as I touched on before, is more on the business side. And so when I joined, I remember one of the first general assemblies I went to, someone mentioned, could we not or should we not explore collective business deals or commercial elements, and not just the political part, not just knowledge sharing where you share something amongst you and then take it home and then you either implement it or don't implement it, but to go kind of one step further, at least on the business side, and collectively pull some rights together potentially, either to generate incremental revenues or potentially save costs. And so that's something that I've tried to grow over the last 8 years now here at the European leagues.
Okay, cool. That's quite an important role you guys play in the ecosystem, I think, and maybe because I think a lot of our listeners wouldn't know how many people are currently working at the organization, and what kind of profiles do they have?
So we have 7, as not 700 or 17. We have seven people. So we're a small, slim team. We have a variety of kind of nationalities, as you might imagine. We have some Swiss-based. We have Italian, Dutch, Spanish, and then myself is a bit mixed. But on paper, I have a UK passport as well. So we have a variety of European nationalities, as you'd expect. Our current managing director, Ecosyste, was a former CEO of the Dutch Eredivisie, so therefore they came from a league directly. Everyone else, I would say, actually didn't work at a league or a club necessarily, but just found their way into working in a sports administration role, like myself. And I think many of the people here have been here for a long time, much longer than me, actually. I think I'm the kind of the middle as such. There's like 12, 13, 14, 15 years here, as well obviously it's, more recent, 1 or 2 years. But we're a small, lean team, which I think reflects often actually the size of leagues in general. They're not that big. And so we have to obviously end up picking and choosing, at least quite carefully, where we can, what we spend our time and energy on. there's a multitude of topics we could look into, but ultimately we need to narrow down and figure out where can we add most value. Some topics are just not relevant for us. They're maybe too club specific, or they're too global. They're not European enough. So we try and find the areas where we believe we can try and add most value when working with our member leagues.
Yeah, and as you say, it's quite a good reflection of the organization of leagues themselves, right? I think a lot of the mid-sized to small leagues, in terms of HR, they have around 10 to 20 people, not more. It's different from federations where you see more employees and more people being involved. But a lot of the leagues are lean and mean. And as you say, the challenge is then to find the right focus. You've mentioned the political role. You're an independent European leagues and an independent body representing the interests of professional leagues. How aligned are you with other governing bodies such as UEFA or national football federations? How does the European leagues kind of fit into the sports governing ecosystem?
So from a reliance point of view, and this has been something that's been, I think, very important to our members, we are not reliant on anyone. So the members pay membership fees. So therefore we can be completely independent on our positions. We have no revenues that come from anywhere else except from our leagues. So in that sense, we're not reliant on anyone. I'd say the most kind of involved relationship we have is, as you can imagine, would be with UEFA, where we have a number of seats in kind of important committees. We have one seat in the UEFA Exco, where our president would sit, and we have a number of other seats in a variety of UEFA committees, whether they be legal or financial or sustainability. One of the key ones would be the club competition committee meeting, but they were also there in a minority role. It's UEFA and the clubs, particularly the ECA, that had many seats, in particular the club competition committee. But we do have a formal relationship with UEFA in that sense, and so we try to play an active role in all the topics that we believe are of fundamental importance to domestic football, even though it's an international landscape.
And one of these topics, I think, that is mentioned quite a lot on across the different kind of communications that you do is around the competitive balance. That seems to be one of the focus points or one of the main topics you work around. What do you see in terms of threats to this competitive balance within the European football ecosystem? And how do you also navigate, I think, the different interests across the organizations around these topics?
Yes, I think if you go to our website, it's true, you will see the words, the European leagues are striving forward to enhance, improve competitive balance. I'd say competitive balance is just kind of a very simple way of trying to summarize in one kind of mission statement what I think any league or any competition organ tries to do, and that is to have interesting competitions. And so obviously one way to summarize that is that if there is a healthy level of competition, or balanced competition, is a nice goal to aim for. But it's not like you can achieve it really necessarily. Sometimes it's just to do with the structure of a country. I mean, clearly bigger cities, even historically, have had more resources, whether probably from a player pool perspective or financial perspective. And I think since the beginning of football itself, there's always been probably dominating teams for a whole variety of reasons. That's not going to change, anytime soon. However, I think as a competition organized perspective, that's always in the back of your mind. What changes are being made, and are they going to improve or worsen the level of competitive tension, competitive balance. People use the word jeopardy in a competition, and so I think that's the often behind the scenes. That's the reoccurring thought a little bit. Now, obviously, a multitude of things can impact competitive balance. The easiest is to focus on money. Clearly, the more kind of financial powers anyone has, you're likely to be able to afford, in this case, better players, better coaches, better everything. But it's not just money. There are other things that I think that rules, regulations that you can try and put in. Clearly, money, and financial distribution is a key element. But there are, I think there are hundreds of things that can impact competitive balance. Even luck's involved, the way you manage a competition. But if you look at the number of teams, the size of that country, how many teams, are the right number to have in the league, the structure of the league, the format of the league, the rules of the league, all these things are ultimately aimed at, I think, if you spoke to any league, what their desired, outcome would be at the end of every season, there's some side of exciting title race, ideally multiple teams happening. You don't know where the championship's going to go on the very last day. I think that happened in Belgium recently, where we used to work, Leander, but also at the bottom of the table too. So it's not just about the championship itself. There's obviously the fights for the European spots and then fights to avoid relegation. So the idea that there's just this, you don't know who's going to win. In the end, certain teams might win more than others, but you would hope that it's a close win as opposed to 6-0 kind of blowouts. And so I think that's why, in very simple terms, many years ago, that competitive balance word was used, but I would say that doesn't really capture, in essence, the bigger picture. But it's one simple way of trying to summarize what the leagues or any competition organizer, I think, is trying to achieve for the participants in their competition.
Okay, very clear. So beside the political purpose, which we've discussed, European leagues also aspires to create commercial value for its member leagues. Can you tell us a bit more about what this means and how this has evolved over the past decade? Because I know you've been one of the drivers behind this.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the leagues have thrown out this concept or idea in the past, and then it's a matter of, can we find a project where the leagues are willing to spend time, effort, and for us to resources for it to pay off. And so with a bit of fortune, I would say timing, luck, but we managed to come across an opportunity in what they call the kind of sports betting space, but it's the kind of commercialization of what they call fast path betting data. But it's a subset of sports event data that has to be captured really in stadia for it to be quick enough with a low latency to get to the betting market. And this was something that historically had not been, say, commercialized particularly well by the league, not for want of trying, but potentially not for understanding the market, not for understanding the opportunity. So we kind of got wind of this idea, looked into it, and actually thought there was an opportunity here. So we began understanding if these rights were being commercialized, yes or no, which leagues would be available to do a first collective deal, actually. And that began with first 8 leagues back in 2015-16, looking into this. We had to hire a lawyer, run a tender, like you do with any sort of process. And then we closed a first, at that time it was a non-exclusive deal with some of the major sports betting aggregators, as they call them, in the market. So that was a 3-year deal. 3 years goes around quite quickly, as you probably remember when you're in these deals. You close the deal, you sign it, kind of get things up and running. Then you're midway through the year and a half, and then you're already planning ahead for the next tender. So we actually then rolled that around and did another non-exclusive deal, but managed to kind of increase the number of leagues actually in this collective project from 8 to 12 to 16, and then most recently in the third iteration of this. So now we're talking kind of 7 years on. We signed a 5-year deal, which is out of obviously the news is out there in the market with IMG Arena, and it was their kind of entry into the European football betting space. At least they had other deals in golf and tennis at the time, but we took an opportunity for a new player to enter the market, and so that's been I guess our biggest and longest running kind of commercial deal. And then we also, in parallel to that, as you kind of get one of these off the ground, people start to go, well, what else could be done? And then we tried to look at some other rights. So we found some international kind of broadcasting rights for the medium and small leagues, which historically have potentially maybe found it challenging to get distribution outside of their home market. Unlike the very biggest leagues, there's this, as you clearly would understand, there's less interest outside of a market for a smaller market. I don't believe there's no interest, but there's less interest. So we did a collective deal there initially with 11 and now with One Football. And we also looked at doing a collective deal in the kind of digital licensing space as the whole kind of NFT world. Obviously, that's had its ups and downs there. But that was an example of leagues coming together and trying to kind of work as a group and trying to tackle a brand new opportunity which they've never dealt with before. And so obviously there's kind of a safety in numbers concept too as well about working together. So we've kind of looked into we kind of categorize it as the data space, the media space, and the licensing space. And so those are three collective business deals. They all have different revenue profiles, but the consistent theme is there's a number of leagues came together, put pen to paper, agreed to commercially sell their rights, have to agree on a distribution model, how you share the revenues, etc. Then there's the ongoing management of those, and obviously some have more work than others, depending on what happens in the business world. But there are acquisitions happen. So 11 was acquired by DAZN in that period of time. That impacted that relationship. One Football had its ups and downs too in the whole Web3 space for those that followed that world. Yes, and so I think everything has its challenges once you enter the business world. Not everything goes smoothly because life is not smooth.
No, and I mean the false betting deal. I was pretty involved in the first two cycles, or at least the first cycle for sure. And I remember it was very new for everybody, right? It was really about exploring what this could look like and trying to find partners in that project. And I think it definitely has paid off. It was something that was kind of generating new revenue streams for the for the leagues. I think that was something where European leagues definitely brought extra value to the table. And I think it also kind of was a change for the organization itself, because you had to, as you said, do a lot of operational work around these business projects afterwards. And I think that that had its impact as well. But it's definitely interesting, and it's a bit similar, as you say, as certain projects that are being run by leagues for their clubs. It's about stakeholder management. It's about getting everybody on board, I think. So very interesting, I think, route you guys took, in a way to reinvent yourselves in a way and drive business value to the leagues. It's a nice couple of projects. And I know now you're also working on a project called Elevate, which is a bit linked to the business side of things. It's more educational, I think. Can you talk a little bit more about this and what it kind of envisions and what the reason is behind this specific project?
Sure. Yeah. So actually, this one is actually not. It doesn't have any links, I'd call it, to the business side directly. This was, I think, our association looking a little bit at seeing what are the services we can provide to our members. We've grown a little bit with the number of members now. We have between 35 and 40 members. It depends how you count them exactly, because we have multiple members from the same country. Some leagues, different divisions have different organizations behind them. But we basically looked at what we see as additional added value that we can give to our members. So we looked around to see what other similar associations do, and many have a version of an education program, if we call it that. So I think we thought it was an opportune time to look into it. Also, because of COVID, the idea of kind of having a hybrid program was something we thought would be easier to execute. And these sort of education programs, you have to fly to places, and that's still extremely valuable. But we thought there could be a mix of having online sessions and physical sessions. But we also didn't particularly see a program that was only dedicated to league professionals. There are different programs, either obviously at universities or UEFA's programs, or even the ECA's programs, but they might touch upon the league role, but ours was only looking at every single topic from the league perspective. So that would also mean we wouldn't touch upon some topics necessarily, but that's something that the league itself would be directly responsible for. And so this is where, I think obviously leagues are a collection of clubs, but there is quite a big distinction ultimately between what the league does and what a club does. There are obviously clear overlaps. But from a league perspective, and many of these things, as you mentioned at the outset, and also I think why the European leagues is not also necessarily well known, we don't expect to be well known, is because much of the work that a league does is very much behind the scenes, organizing the calendar, running the commercial tenders, dealing with safety, security, refereeing, VAR, all these things that it's only when they don't, when there's an incident happens, people pay attention to them. But otherwise, if they're operating smoothly, you actually don't kind of hear about them, whether they're financial sanctions for clubs, etc. So we wanted to have a program. So we launched that last year. That was the first edition. We had 20 individuals from 20 different leagues be on the program. And these aren't necessarily the people we always know as well, who come to our general assemblies, etc. There may be the kind of next levels of kind of management within a league. Some of those maybe have slightly less international exposure because their role is more domestic, because it's a domestic league. And so for them, it's an opportunity to develop an international network. And I think, and often it takes more than once to meet someone to become friends. So it's a year-long program, or kind of follow the academic time frame from September to May. Basically, we have 4 physical sessions over 3 days, and the physical sessions are still the most valuable, where people interact. And we invite speakers, as you expect. We don't have that many speakers actually, because we try and allow time for discussion as well. We also have put them in groups, have them work on a group project, and deliver that at the end. So that was us trying to step into the kind of personal, individual development of the people working at our member leagues, and expand the kind of network that they have. And often I think they learn from each other, not in the sessions itself directly, but in between sessions. Sitting on the bus from one venue to the next venue, you speak with each other from all different countries. And obviously when they get back to their leagues, I think they probably know someone much better than they would normally in another league. And they can call that person and say, oh, listen, I have a question, even if it's in a different department, can you put me in touch with someone? And so I think it starts to foster those sort of bonds. So that's what we ran for. This is our second edition of it now. And our final session is going to take place in Frankfurt, hosted by the DFL in May. And that will wrap up our first 2 editions. And then we're actually going to take a break from it. We're not going to do a year 3 right away. And we'll sit back, evaluate, discuss how the first 2 editions went, and then think about planning forward, how it might evolve, change. So Elevate was a name we came up with, kind of elevate. Obviously, we were trying to elevate the individuals, elevate the league indirectly. Obviously, EL, elevate, the initials of our association in the beginning, so a little play on words there. But this could maybe evolve too. But it's meant to have more of an education-ish element to it. But we don't plan to open it up and be, another education program. it's an in-house program.
Yeah, something you've mentioned as well, I think, is just in terms of the challenges that all of these leagues face. All of these executives or managers at the leagues face are pretty similar. I was always surprised in the beginning. I was working at the Pro League, at the Belgian Pro League, when I was speaking to either a small or a big league. It could be the LFP, it could be Bundesliga, or it could be smaller leagues than our league. The challenges are broadly similar. And that's something I think along the way you learn when you speak to all of these people at the leagues, that they can learn a lot from each other, and they can benefit, as you say, a lot from having that kind of international network. So it really makes sense, I think, to organize something like this. And then when we look at the...
Yeah, I just want to add just add one thing, maybe before we jump to the next topic, is I think a lot of what gets learned are things that those individuals or the league cannot ever say publicly. And so in that sense, this is a closed forum, closed group, where, publicly in different press releases, certain things will be mentioned. The clubs voted unanimously here or there, or majority of vote, but you never know exactly what happened. And so these sorts of forums allow people to dig a little bit deeper and to share things. And I think that's where, honestly, the real learning happens, where people will share things, not confidential things that they're not allowed to share, but just behind the scenes explanations of what really happened and how the decision ended up here. And I think that is, like you said, that's extremely valuable. And that only happens when you create a certain environment of trust within the group, but then also they have to kind of form almost personal bonds with other individuals, and then they're willing to kind of open up and share things that they wouldn't normally share.
Yeah, the communication is often different from the reality behind the scenes, right? So that's what you alluded to as well. So I can definitely relate to that. And when you look at the kind of the business side of things in terms of the maturity level of the leagues across Europe, can you also relate to what I said in terms of the challenges, and do you see a lot of kind of different maturity levels when it comes to general business savviness? What evolutions do you see maybe in terms of the people that are working at the leagues? Do you see certain trends?
So yeah, I think that's interesting questions. I think when I first started here, you have maybe certain ideas about big leagues, medium leagues, small leagues. Are the bigger leagues more advanced here or not? And my short answer to that would be no, not necessarily at all. And I think what I realized it comes down to is that the savviness, if that's the word we want to use, or the knowledge, I think people can learn quite easily now what the so-called very best practices are, whatever they happen to be. That information is available, via quite interesting podcasts nowadays, by research reports, by all these events that happen out there. That's not hard to get, I don't think. I think what does make everything different is once you factor in the cultural elements of that particular country, the business environment, the structure of that league, whether they can make certain decisions happen or not, the governance structure, and often, if from a league perspective, we're talking, in the end, clubs are voting for things, and so then you come down to the reality of life, and there might be great ideas out there, but even if the CEO of a league wants to execute something or thinks it's in the best interests, it may not be possible for, if we use the word, for political reasons or for a whole variety of reasons. And so therefore, what I've, I think at least kind of understood is that it's just not so straightforward. Everyone is trying to move forward, trying to develop, and obviously trying, to, and I think sometimes you have to even move forward just to kind of stand still a little bit. But it's extremely difficult. And so, yes, amount of knowledge might vary. My guess is compared to 10, 20 years ago, that knowledge gap, it's shrunk, I think, because you can learn so much. One CEO from a small league can call up another CEO within our network and find out things quite quickly. But then it's about can it be executed or not in that country, whether that's for financial reasons, political reasons, or other reasons. Maybe, there aren't enough telcos in that company to create enough competition for whatever. So it doesn't matter what you structure from a tender perspective, if that's just the way the country is structured. And then obviously you have conflicts of interest sometimes with different ownership groups of clubs. So I think you really have to understand the environment that sport is operating in. Everyone's trying to do their best, but it's not so easy. If you were to be transplanted into a particular country wherever you are in Europe, I think you'd soon come across challenges that you didn't. Maybe you kind of would generally understand, but you wouldn't really understand how hard it is sometimes until you then kind of face it face to face.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe a little bit linked, but at La Source we're quite we have a strong idea or a strong vision around the role of leagues and the role they can play to drive centralized growth in the ecosystem. And as you know as well, I've worked a lot around these kind of centralized strategies at the Belgian Pro League, whether it's services, technologies, or anything like that. But I was just interested, what's your view on this? What do you feel a league, the role a league can play within their ecosystem? And as you mentioned, with all these different stakeholders, whether it's broadcaster partners or clubs, what is the role they can play?
So I think since I've been here, the general trend that I see is it seems like leagues are at least asking themselves, either they're being pushed to consider or they themselves are considering what else could be done at a central level. Obviously, with the involvement of new technologies and cloud-based systems and what have you, you don't need as much hardware, there's more software. So, certain things that would have been hard to centralize from a physical perspective are now, digital. And that opens up, I think, many opportunities. Then I think the kind of sports business ecosystem is potentially becoming much more, complicated, challenging. The idea of just running a tender for media rights and then having a few people bid and then doing that same thing 3 years later. Everyone that follows this space, there's, do you have an OTT strategy? Yes, no. Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you get involved in more D2C, fan relationships, fan segmentation, digital technologies, commercialization of new IP, the whole NFT space. So I would say people obviously, say this in a way that means more potential opportunities, maybe more potential pitfalls too. And so I think there's much more that a league could do. In general, the trend I see is leagues kind of having more staff than less staff. So if we look at the last 10, 15 years, now some have gone, to kind of hundreds of people, but I think in general, whether it's a small league, just having 2 or 3 more staff, whether that's a data analyst type of person in the league office or these sorts of new type of roles. I think there's more that can be done. But then again, then the league has to basically agree with its clubs to allocate a budget towards it. And then the clubs have to have, be convinced, I would say, to put another 1% of centralized revenues and leave them at the league to then be reinvested, for the longer term. I think leagues, and I think the way we try and summarize the work we do a little bit too is, the clubs are thinking week to week. The leagues are normally thinking, season to season in general, maybe multiple season. Then we here at the European leagues, because we don't manage our own competition, obviously. I think we have, I call it a bit of a luxury maybe, but to try and think and work on projects that are, multi-year or 3, 5, 7 years in the future, and try and find those projects where the league and the clubs just don't have the time focus on it because they have much more pressing issues. But I would say yes, in general, the idea or the question of what could/should be potentially centralized is a common area of discussion, and then each league needs to figure out what it can and can't do, what the timeline is, what the priorities are. But I would guess, in 10, 20 years' time, the league is probably doing more than it is now, than just organizing the calendar and just doing a media rights deal. There's probably much more that can be done.
Yeah, I guess the relationship you have with the leagues is a bit similar, like the relationship leagues have with the clubs, right? In terms of being a little bit more longer term, trying to inspire them with all these kind of, as you said, best practices, but also going beyond that, and leading the way, which is quite interesting. As you're involved in the commercial domain of the organization, and maybe to finish up this part on the different projects, but where do you see changes that are needed for the rather traditional business model of European football leagues in general? Do you see certain opportunities or certain evolutions where you feel changes is needed?
So I'd say, this is pointing out the obvious a little bit, but I think leagues, or I think any sports organizer needs to probably think about diversification of revenue streams. And so, whether you talk about media rights, especially domestically, I mean, maybe many have, flatlined to a large degree. So if you're going to try and find incremental growth, need to probably start to be not just creative, but just look at what's out there, and to start to maybe look at the league as a platform of some sort, right? Because it has a lot of reach. But what does that mean? What areas are you going to get involved in? By looking just beyond the media part, there's still a lot more to do probably in the media part. My guess is you have to kind of work a little bit harder than you did in the past to kind of even maintain those revenues or generate additional revenues. The space that we're focusing on a little bit here is the whole kind of sports data value chain. So the idea of data, which was something that we touched upon at the very beginning, which we think was at least from a league/club perspective, was a kind of undervalued asset. I think sports data is being used in all sorts of ways now and by all sorts of companies. And so I think understanding that value chain and, where the leagues and clubs are within that. And so are they getting their fair share, let's say, of it, potentially. And then the licensing space too, where the idea that, you can digitally create IP and then commercialize that, that comes with its, with its challenges and pitfalls as well. So, but I think you could see, in once again looking, far in the future a little bit, but in 10, 20 years time, there's likely to be a diversification of revenue sources, or at least to explore that. Because if you're only relying on the historical, at least from a centralized perspective, just media rights, that's still obviously extremely important, but there might be other ancillary revenues that you can try to play with. Some will be a test. Test it. If it works well, invest more. Sometimes you test it. If it doesn't work, then you kill it. I think that's an area where the leagues with the clubs will have to be able to, invest some time and money into a bit of future scenario planning where the payoff might not be immediate, but it's probably something that you need to at least seriously think about.
Yeah, and I think, it's less of a comfortable position, I think, now for leagues and clubs maybe to be in, as you say. So they need to be inventive about creating those new revenue streams. And we've seen a lot is centered around understanding your IP, your product better, taking ownership over it to a certain extent. We've seen that from ticketing to media rights to now to data. And I think that ownership is not necessarily doing everything yourself, but it's finding the right kind of partners and understanding, as you say, around data, understanding the value chain, know where the money is going to, and what kind of players play a role in that value chain. I think that's something that we see with a lot of leagues are exploring or trying to understand. I think that is the first step towards probably being part of the value chain, and also finding new revenue streams. It all starts with understanding the product, and we saw that with media rights in the past. It was always say it was about take the money and run. You just get as much money from the tender process, and then you see each other again after a couple of years. But now it's all about more having a partnership kind of relationship with those broadcasters as well, to try to grow the product together. And all of these kind of things center around making sure that you understand your product and you have the context around you and the organization around you to really leverage your IP, and that's, I think, pretty key. Yeah, we're running towards the end of the podcast already. Was very interesting. We always end up with two more general questions for all of our invitees, or I don't know the word for it, but it's the two questions are: if you had to share one piece of kind of advice for the listeners passionate about the business of football, innovation and evolving business models, what would it be? Do you have a career advice or anything like that you would like to share with our listeners?
So yeah, I tried to think about it a little bit. I came up with something, new or something. I was unable to. I thought I'd just be quite honest and straightforward. I think the idea of being, just frankly inquisitive, and just reading a lot. I use podcasts quite a bit now, actually, funnily enough. I think there's the quality of the podcasts that are out there, at least in the sports business space, but, in the other space, that allows you to learn a lot quite quickly from some interesting people, discussing and sharing things. So I think those are the things that to be successful in one way or another in any space, but is to kind of keep on being inquisitive and always not assuming you know that much. Always people that know more. But if you know just enough to be able to kind of hold yourself in a conversation around a whole variety of topics, every now and again, then you have to go for a deep dive. Obviously, you can't just be a generalist in everything. But many of it, especially in the sports industry, are all intertwined in one way or another. So to be able to kind of make sense of the whole picture, I think you have to try to be quite broad in following what's happening out there.
Yeah, and the being inquisitive, I think, links a bit to taking the initiatives yourself as well. And you've seen this throughout your career. I think you've taken a lot of initiatives based on what you thought was the right way forward. So learning along the way, not always feeling comfortable, but just starting new projects and, as you say, test and then see if it works or not. But I think definitely inquisitive is something that is quite important for your career and just in general as a person. And then the last one, if you had to recommend a book series or movie or anything like that, what would it be? And how did it inspire you?
So I haven't finished it yet, but I'll still kind of recommend it anyway. So I came across this individual, well, a little while ago now already, when he was working, I think actually after he left the league. So Roger Mitchell actually has his own podcast as well. I've gotten a chance to meet him a little bit as well. But he's written a book recently called Sports Perfect Storm. I've not finished it yet, so just to be quite frank. But I think for a bit of a summary of where the sports industry is, maybe where it's going. It's obviously heavily business focused, but has non-business parts as well. So I think that's something I'd recommend to someone. Maybe people who've followed Roger, you probably get a sense of what might be in the book. But I think it's different when someone distills it all in kind of one body of work. That's one thing I'd recommend to someone if they haven't come across it yet.
I also have it here on my desk, and it's the next thing to read. But as you say, there's a lot of those. But it's a very interesting kind of perspective, because Virgil has a more kind of financial background. I think that's sometimes something, at least for me, for example, I don't have that specific knowledge, and I think it's something that interconnects with sports more and more. And he has quite a strong opinion and big expertise. So without even having, I haven't read it, haven't started it, but I'm also I join you in recommending it. I join you in recommending it because I'm sure it will be very valuable. So Chris, thanks a lot for the conversation. It was great. I wish you all the best in the future. I'm sure we'll speak soon. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Le Corner International Podcast. Don't hesitate to give us a like, share, or a positive rating if you enjoy these sessions. And if you want to participate or recommend someone, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoy it as much as we love creating them. If you like the episode, feel free to comment, rate, and share with people around you. You can visit our website, www.lastsource.io, to learn more about our activities. You will discover a wide range of articles and can subscribe to our newsletter to receive the latest tech and sports news in your mailbox every month. Stay tuned for new episodes.
Le Corner.